Let's see. Oh. Let's see. Oh. What's up, guys? Not sure who's here with me. Let me see. Coming a little bit from a different little place today. Can you guys hear me? Not sure. Let me just double check what we're doing here. Anybody out there? Or is that just... Oh, somebody here. Maybe that was me. I don't know. Let's see. I'm going to do a sound check here. Let's see. I'm going to do a sound check here. So we're all live. So I'm coming at you guys today doing the daily video from my house because my wife had some foot surgery, and so she needed me to take care of her this afternoon, get her home from the hospital or the surgery, and get her drugs and all that, and take care of her. So I have a few minutes. Unfortunately, I'm not going to do any push-ups for you guys. I don't have space here to do them, but I just wanted to check in with everybody. And if people are here live, then I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody might have. Let me fix that camera a little bit. Let me see what we got here. Let me just check over. So it just looks like me talking to myself. I wanted to talk a little bit. We always have, when we're doing our push-ups and we're sit-ups here, when we're usually doing them in the gym, I have Kevin to bounce ideas off of, and we usually have a pretty good discussion. So it's tough to do that when you're by yourself, but I'll give it a go, just sort of a thought for the day, if you will. In general, what I think of when people sometimes ask me what the most valuable aspects of training jiu-jitsu are. And for every person who's trained jiu-jitsu, there's probably a different answer. I think there are a couple different common answers that you might hear. Every person who trains for a while will have some variation on a theme. And, for some people, the benefit of jiu-jitsu, or the primary benefit of jiu-jitsu, is, going someplace that they can have, some social interaction with people. Other people might say that the greatest value that they derive from jiu-jitsu training is learning how to defend themselves or gaining confidence that they could if they needed to. Some people might say that they gain a lot of self-confidence just from the discipline of going and training every day, or as many days as they can, and facing whatever difficulties that they have to face in their training. And whether that's training super hard, getting ready for a competition, or just going in and just training really hard, on the nights that they've been there, just trying to be consistent. And that's not an insignificant thing either. Some people gain a lot of confidence from going through the kind of trials and tribulations of just everyday training. It can be intense to go and put yourself in an environment where people are going to try to choke you out and you're going to try to choke them out, or and there's definitely an aspect of violent physical confrontation that you face every time you go and you train, and you're also risking injury every time you go and you train. I think for some people, they just enjoy the aspect of competition, right? Other people, maybe they're doing it for fitness. They just like to go, feel like they're getting fit, like they're getting their exercise. And I think those are all great things. But I guess what I would like to talk a little bit. Oh, yes, podcast time, Cameron. I don't know if you saw the first part, but I can't do today from the gym because my wife had foot surgery, and so I've been taking care of her all day and making sure I got her drugs, and she just woke up actually and made sure she got something in her stomach, and so we couldn't make it to the gym today, so I wanted to at least do something with for the day, and so I'm happy to, if you have any questions. I was just talking, or was going to talk about what I've derived over the years, what I've learned from jiu-jitsu, and the value that I've taken from training, over the years, and it's changed over the years, for sure. Yeah, no, she's totally fine. Thank you for asking. The surgery, I think, went perfectly fine, and she just had a cyst in her toe, and she's an avid runner, so it was a real pain in the butt for her, and so she needed to get that removed. And this is actually the second time she's had a cyst in her foot, so it's the second surgery. And but I think she's gone through it fine. She's just going to be off of her feet for about a week. So the first day is always the hardest. She's had ankle surgery, she had a cyst surgery before, and now she's got this second one. So she's kind of a pro at it. But the first day is always tough. She was super loopy when she came out, when I picked her up. And so she can't drive, and she couldn't walk. She couldn't do pretty much anything. I literally carried her into the house and put her down on the couch, and then just let her go to sleep. And then I had to go down to the store and get her drugs. So, like I said, not going to be able to make it into the gym today, but I wanted to at least, spend a little time talking the way we usually talk in the middle of our push-ups and our sit-ups and our squats, just so, I like to keep I'm a creature of habit for sure. And this has become these, Monday through Friday videos. It's not a part of my everyday habit, and it's helpful to me. I don't know if it is for you guys. You're a regular viewer too. To just kind of check in and reach out to people and have a little discussion. So, like I said, if you have something, you can ask me anything. It's pretty much just us, but it'll be cool to, at least it'll be down for anybody else who wants to come and watch. But I was going to talk about, like I said, what I've learned the most and how jiu-jitsu has sort of changed for me. I've been training a long time, and I've trained in a couple different places. And so as time has gone on, I think my focus and what the value that I've derived from jiu-jitsu has changed. It's not something that is fixed. It may be for other people. Some people may be just like, hey, I just love coming in and working out and, getting the challenge of, the competitive challenge or the ego check or whatever it is. And like I said earlier in the stream, that it varies from person to person. So yeah, I'll give you my my quick back of the I guess thumbnail. I don't know what the right cliche is, but sort of why I started training jiu-jitsu and how that's changed over the years and what I've kind of learned. And I think when I first started jiu-jitsu, or when I first thought about doing jiu-jitsu, my motivation was purely self-defense and training in order to become capable of fighting, essentially. I mean, anybody can fight, but like capable of fighting well. And for me specifically, it was I would go out and play basketball. In basketball, there's a lot of trash talking, and I was pretty good with trash talking because people would want to fight me all the time. So maybe I wasn't that good, but it would definitely get under people's skin. So, eventually I was like, I should really learn how to defend myself. And fortuitously, I guess, jiu-jitsu at that point was kind of just breaking through the public consciousness in the United States. And so, eventually I found out that there was a jiu-jitsu school near me in Philadelphia, and I would travel down there, 3-4 times a week and train with a guy named Steve Maxwell. And, at that time, jiu-jitsu was all about self-defense. There was no sport jiu-jitsu. And what little there was, I shouldn't say there was no, there were a few things in the Northeast, but, they were like free-for-alls. They were, even those early sport jiu-jitsu tournaments were, you could wear or not wear whatever you wanted. If you wanted to come in a t-shirt or no shirt, you could do that. You wanted to wear a gi, you could do that. Eddie Bravo was relatively famous at the time, when he was a purple belt, for wearing gi pants, but just a t-shirt. And you could go to these tournaments and you could slam each other. That was very common. In fact, there's a famous video of a guy named Cameron Earl. I guess he was up against Henner Gracie, and Cameron Earl was like a feared dude. And I think Henner slammed him in the middle of a match and knocked him out. And I think Cameron Earl had like a seizure or something. But the jiu-jitsu tournaments were just free-for-alls, and people would just go nuts. Oh, hey Connie, what's up? Making naan. I was thinking, speaking of naan, sorry, apropos of nothing, I was thinking of a great name for an Indian restaurant called Naan of Your Business. You can use that if you want. Sorry, I can't. My wife's was in surgery today, so she's fine. I had to take care of her. It was her foot that needed some surgery, and she's totally fine. It was a planned surgery, and but I couldn't. I thought maybe I could make it because the surgery was scheduled at 10, but it took a couple hours. By the time I get her home, I had to go get her medicine, the whole thing, and of course she's super groggy and needs to be taken care of. So I felt like I couldn't leave her side in her time of need. So but at the same time, I still wanted to, have our daily check-in and chat. So I didn't want to miss that. So anyway, I'm just talking about, yeah, thank you, Connie. Just want to talk about, like we always have these cool things while we're doing push-ups and nice discussions when we're doing, doing our push-ups and sit-ups and such. And I thought I'd do the best I can today, and under the circumstances. So anyway, I was talking about the value of jiu-jitsu and how that, to me personally, and how that's changed over the years. And so I was saying, originally, jiu-jitsu was all about fighting for me. It was all about self-defense. And, that was, I think, shared, that goal was shared over at that time with like almost 99% of the people, because there was no real competition in jiu-jitsu. There was no IBJJF in the United States yet. There was Grappler's Quest, there was Naga. I'm not sure if they ever came to Philadelphia at that point, but if you went up to New York or you went down to DC, you could get some of those, get into those tournaments. So yeah, so like when I was in New York, or I'm sorry, in Philly when I started off, and then I went down to Miami for grad school, and it was the same stuff. I still wanted to learn how to fight. Everybody who was in there was fighting. Very few people had ever even been to a competition in those first couple of years, because there just weren't that many. And then when I moved to New York, it was interesting because I went to New York for law school, and I went to one of sort of the most, one of the schools, one of the academies with the most I guess one of the most complete, or how would I put this? There were a lot of like legit high level MMA fighters and Abu Dhabi competitors and just elite grapplers at Henzo's when I got there. And we had Abu Dhabi champions there. We had MMA champions there, and that just grew and grew over the years that I was there. And as time went on, there were more competitions, and the competition scene became more developed. There were more to go to. They were better organized, so on and so forth. So that's when I started getting into competitive jiu-jitsu. But as my life became more focused on my career, I really was not focused on fighting anymore. I wasn't getting it. I mean, you live in New York, you're going to get into some low-level, verbal altercations on the street. Occasionally you get into a physical altercation. But, the one thing I learned when I was in Miami is that jiu-jitsu is probably not going to help you in a lot of situations. And what I mean by that is, in Miami, guns are very common. And there were a lot of shootings in Miami when I was there. I wasn't involved in any of them, but they were just sort of like all the time happening. Yeah, I'm walking over here. Exactly. No, I'll tell you a story. There was this guy, I was walking, it was the wintertime in New York City. And, in Times Square and Herald Square, probably in other places too, they would have these guys. They'd have this organization that would come out and they would shovel the sidewalks in front of the stores. And, they got these guys. They were like on work release. So they're a pretty rough crowd. And I remember one guy, as I'm walking by, I think I was walking out of the academy. I had trained that morning. I'm walking to work, and this guy, he takes, he shovels some snow, and he like shovels it onto my feet when I'm walking, right? And I'm pissed. So I'm like, what the fuck? And he turns to me, and I could tell instantly he was a pretty hard guy. I could tell just by his face, his demeanor. And he's just like, what? And I remember he's got this, and he's there's that initial reaction where, where someone does something to you and you feel like, hey, that was not cool. And you react. And then, the person turns to you and you realize, oh, they're kind of pissed too now, because I just, called you an asshole or something like that. And I don't think I called him an asshole, because I'm not that. But I would be like, I probably said, what the fuck? And I remember he turned to me and I was like, oh man. And he's got this shovel, and he's not big, dude. He's not big. But he's got this shovel in his hand, and he like kind of hitches it up like he might take a swing with it. And I'm like, oh shit. I don't want to get into a fight in the middle of the snow. It's, in New York City on my way to work. I can't be late. I don't want to wind up in the hospital with this guy attacking me, this ex-con or something, attacking me with the shovel. And so, I'm just like, I'm in no way prepared for a fight with this guy. And so I think he just said what to me, and I just was like, whatever, and I kept walking. And he kind of didn't chase after me, but he kept walking after me. And he's like, what'd you say to me? And And I just kept walking because I did not want to get into a physical altercation with this guy. And I was like, oh man, I don't need this. And I think, I kind of learned a little bit about, I was going back, I was talking about Miami, that, you can have these types of interactions, but you don't know always who you're dealing with or what state of mind that they are in. Out here the other thing I would say is out here in California, it's very much a car culture, a commuter culture. You don't really have to, involve yourself. You don't see that many people just out on the street, just walking along. Whereas in New York City, you are on the street with everybody. There's no car for you to jump into or drive away with. So, I came to think when I was in New York City that like jiu-jitsu was less about, me, or I shouldn't say that it wasn't about being able to defend yourself. But I think it slowly morphed away from that because I sort of realized like I was at the stage in my life I didn't want to be getting into fights with people out on the street, and that the repercussions for getting into fights could be severe. So, in Miami, you didn't want to get into any fights with anybody because you didn't know if they were going to pull a gun on you because they were just so common. Anybody could get a gun in Miami. And in New York, you just didn't know when if somebody got into your face or you got into their face, if you had an opportunity to not get into that fight, that was probably an opportunity you should take. And so, when you get a little bit older and you kind of understand what the consequences potentially are for getting into fights all the time, you kind of get a little less, or you get more nonviolent, right? For a long time I'd be like, yeah, I want to get into a fight. I want to see, if this stuff works, whatever. But over time I realized like there's no question it works. It's just a question of, is it worth, what you have to risk? And so if you don't know what that risk is, like what's the point? If I get into a fight with this ex-con, what does he have to lose and what do I have to lose? Right? I mean, they're not the same. So, if I get into a fight, something happens, I could, even if I beat his ass, does that mean I get charged? Am I going to lose my law license? Like, you never know. You can say like, oh, that was in self-defense or whatever, but, that's for the judge to decide. So anyway, it got to the point where, jiu-jitsu at that time, I became much more active sport-wise. And, what I really liked about it at that point was, especially with my practice as a lawyer, believe it or not, there is a lot of physical and kind of verbal intimidation that goes on in the law, in your general litigation practice. And I had a lot of people, older guys especially, who would try to like intimidate me because I was a junior attorney at that point. And so, a lot of times I go to these depositions, I go to court hearings, and there'd be like this older guy. I was 30, so there'd be this 45-year-old guy, and he'd be like screaming at me. And, what I noticed was that I just wasn't, like, these guys couldn't intimidate. Even if they were a lot bigger than me, they just couldn't intimidate me. And I would just kind of look at them and laugh because I knew they weren't going to like fight me. So, what are they going to do? They're just screaming at me, right? Or whatever. I had one guy scream at me at a deposition, and I just kind of laughed at him and just took the wind right out of his sails. And I started to realize at that point that for me, the value of jiu-jitsu had switched from being primarily a method or feeling confident about myself in like a real physical altercation. It had changed, or at least kind of there had been a layer that had sort of been added on top of that, where it was being able to stay calm in very stressful situations. It was like it didn't matter what happened during my day in court or in a deposition or with a tough meeting or something like that with an angry client or whatever. because that night I'd go and I'd be choking and people would be choking me, and I'd be like, this is not, you don't frighten me. Just the stress, not to say that it wasn't stressful and I didn't get nervous and things like that, but that I knew that, or that I felt a calmness in my kind of everyday life. It's almost like a detachment that I developed in stressful situations, and I really attribute that to jiu-jitsu. And when I look at my practice as a lawyer, not only did I get to the point where I wasn't really intimidated by anyone, like mentally, right? But I also felt that I started being able to, people talk about like verbal jujitsu, which is kind of corny, but I kind of felt like I could do that in my practice, in how I argued cases. And, I started looking for ways to kind of take the philosophy of jujitsu and incorporate it in how, I litigated my cases. And, because a lot of times what happens is you, as a lawyer, as a litigator, you start, you have your arguments, you have your perspective, and you make your arguments, and you don't always focus so much on the other person's arguments, other than to say, well, you're wrong. If you say anything at all, you may not even acknowledge. I may not have even acknowledged some of these arguments that the other side was making. And what I learned was that, I could start using my adversaries' arguments against them, and I could start using their kind of tactics against them, and it was incredibly effective because it would take them off guard. It's one of those things where if you're always fighting somebody and refusing to acknowledge any of their good arguments or good points, you lose credibility with the court when you just say, hey, that's a good point, but then you don't recognize it. You just fight back with it. But you've got this person, this judge or this mediator or this arbitrator, who has to pick a side, has to agree with somebody's argument or not. And if you're always fighting against somebody's good arguments, and trying to explain why they're wrong, or always kind of wasting your time like figuring out why things are wrong, even if they're not, that doesn't always bear the most fruit. And so what I started to learn was that I didn't have to fight every single one of everyone's arguments in every case, that I could accept certain things that didn't really matter, or were either irrelevant, or I could even use to my advantage. So I thought that was something that was very similar to jiu-jitsu, in the sense of, you don't have to resist everything that somebody does on the mat. You can often use that to your own advantage. And I think also, when I would be in like an oral argument, or I'd be in court, sometimes you have to be opportunistic. If you're always so focused on what you're trying to do, or what your plan is, you lose perspective a little bit, or you lose the ability to adapt or improvise. And in jiu-jitsu, you develop a calmness eventually while you're training, and even when bad things are happening, you can still kind of bide your time. And I found that that's also valuable, right? Not overreacting. Don't do something foolish. I'll give you an example. There have been many times when a judge asks me something, and in the beginning, I'd often try to answer the judge, or even a client, without really knowing what I was talking about, right? I wouldn't be bullshitting the judge, but I would be, I try to like put together an argument on the spot. And, I guess I can do that pretty well. but it just wasn't satisfying. And then one day somebody called me on it. One of my colleagues called me on it. We used to do these moot courts before we do oral argument, and he asked me a question. I kind of did what I often did, and he's like, "But you don't actually know the answer to the question." I was like, "No, I don't know the actual answer," and then he told me, just say you don't know. Just say you don't know. You don't want to say you don't know. You never want to say that you don't know something. When it's a judge or a client or your boss or whatever, your kids sometimes. You want to appear, and it's important to appear that you really know what you're talking about. But saying you don't know is actually a pretty powerful thing, because it allows you, so what I would do is I'd say I don't know, but I'm happy to write a brief for the court on the question, and what that allows you to do is, it's obviously a question that is important to the judge or the client or to your boss, and it actually gives you a chance to step back and say, okay, now I can really focus on this question. I'm not bullshitting for 2 minutes and then the person's going to walk away and say that guy's full of shit. It actually increases your credibility, because you're like, I don't know. I'm telling you I don't know, but I'm happy to go and research the question and develop it and answer it for you if you give me a day or two, or an afternoon. Sometimes the judge wants it that afternoon. So what would you say there? Refusing to own a lack of knowledge is one of the easiest ways to lose credibility. Yeah, exactly. That is exactly right. When somebody bullshits you and you know they're bull, or you think, and then you go back, it is deadly. It is deadly, and it's not just deadly for that. I would appear in front of a lot of the same judges, because I would practice in front of the same courts. And once you have a reputation for bullshitting or lying or misrepresenting or omitting facts, whether it's in your briefs or your oral arguments, the judges never trust you, and then you're always behind the 8 ball. What you want to have is the constant credibility. You want to have somebody feel confident, the decision maker or the client or whatever, to know that, look, this guy's not going to bullshit me. And so what I always did was, if I didn't know, I would just say I wouldn't say it's a good question, because if it's a judge, of course, every question they ask is a good question. But I would see it as an opportunity to really answer something, to take the time to answer that judge's question, and kind of knock it out of the park. If it was something they thought was important, then then you wanted to do you wanted to kind of line up the best answer you could for them. And so I think all those things, when I look back on my legal career, having a little bit of a detachment, being calm, realizing that sometimes it's like quicksand. I don't know if you guys, when I was a kid, they had all these movies, and there was always quicksand in the movies. People would go out into the jungle, and then they would get into quicksand, and then there'd be like the whole episode, like Gilligan's Island. I don't know if you guys ever watched Gilligan's Island, but I don't know what Big Yikes is. For what? The Gilligan's Island? Quicksand? I don't know if you guys remember this, but there used to be like cartoons, there'd be quicksand. And the whole thing with quicksand was, the more you struggled against the quicksand, the more, the faster you would sink under and you would die. And so the whole thing with quicksand was calm. Okay, you're in trouble. You can't struggle. You're not going to fight your way out of that physically. You gotta remain calm, remain as still as possible. And then usually it's like somebody like Lassie. I don't know if you guys remember Lassie. I was going to go get help or whatever. And jiu-jitsu is the same way. Jiu-jitsu is so often you're in the quicksand, and the harder you fight the quicksand, the worse it is for you. And especially, because I was training with people who were so good, and I was a blue belt or a purple belt, but I'm on the mat with Abu Dhabi champions and MMA champions and like legends, people coming in and visiting, Roger Gracie, Braulio, Gordo. I mean, it's just crazy. And like well, I mean, if you're in their quicksand, you're gonna drown anyway. But certainly struggling and flailing blindly is just going to hasten your demise. And so I think learning how to stay calm under pressure when the situations are dire has been one of the like kind of the greatest abilities, or thing that I valued the most from jiu-jitsu over the years. And the other thing is, it's so applicable. Like I'm talking about being a lawyer and trying to be, remaining calm, in this situation. You have to remain calm. Being calm is the most important thing. Being detached is the most important thing, especially when things are at the most hectic and you feel like you're out of control. Sometimes you're out of control, and the only control you have is you. You only have control over yourself. You don't have any, like you can't control all these other variables around you that are attacking you or pushing on you or pulling you, sometimes all at once. And so you have to just, all you can do is control yourself. And that ability of self-control is, I think to me the most important thing. When I was a kid, I think I did a lot of things rashly. I would just react. I'd get angry, or I'd get sad, or I would rail against how unfair everything was. Sometimes life's unfair. Yeah. Sometimes a situation is something, even if it's not of your own making, it's just you can't control it. So you just gotta control yourself, and usually you're going to make the best of that situation. And it might be the best, like you could get the best outcome, or it could be just the best of a series of bad, options or outcomes. But I don't think I've ever regretted not taking, not resisting as hard as possible, or not taking a step back. I've never regretted just waiting. And maybe that's just my personality. Some people are very aggressive and they want to make things happen. And I think that's a totally viable way to go about your life and your career. And I wouldn't say that I'm totally passive either, but when things get really hectic, I think, I always come back to that, trying to kind of keep that calmness in kind of the eye of the storm, so to speak. It's a little cliche, but I think that's for me, that was the one of the biggest things. Of course, being involved in jiu-jitsu keeps you, if you're active in your training, it keeps you pretty healthy. There's that. That's also important, I think, as I get older. I guess the other thing is just a persistence, I think, is the other one, right? I think that's the other huge thing of jiu-jitsu is just jiu-jitsu is a lot of losing and learning humility and not quitting because you've lost. You've been tapped out 100 times, or not quitting because, I remember, a quick aside, I remember one of, I don't know if you guys ever met Mason. He's one of my kid students. And I remember, the first tournament he ever went to, he killed the guy. He killed everybody and won the gold medal. And the second tournament he went to, he was so cocky. He went in there in his first match, he got triangled and submitted. And he comes off the mat and he's crying and, I hate this sport and I'm going to quit. I'm never training again. And I was like, no, you're going to come back and it's okay. And he came back and it's okay. And I think he's in those two little things, kind of captures, a microcosm of like all of jiu-jitsu. Everybody has these ups and downs and plateaus. That's the hardest. The plateau is the hardest. The feeling that you are not getting better, and in fact, not only are you not getting better, but the fact that you're plateauing must mean, because you see other people getting better, but you feel you're plateauing, That is the hardest. That is the hardest thing, is to feel like you're not making any progress. And because other people are making progress, it actually feels like your skills are diminishing, right? You feel like, oh, I'm not even as good as those guys. And there could be people who I remember, when I was a purple belt at Henzo's, I definitely hit that plateau. And I think this is true for everybody who trains. And sometimes you hit multiple plateaus. And I remember I was a purple belt, and I got my purple belt, and I was like, this is awesome. I'm on my way. And, I hit one of those plateaus after like a year and a half or a year into being a purple belt. I just hit a brick wall, and I didn't feel like I was getting any better. And then all the people who were like blue belts and even white belts, people, I remember one of my best buddies, Jason, I think he was a blue belt or a purple belt. And he started training. He started as a white belt. He actually got me back into training because I was in law school at the time. And I hadn't trained in a long time, actually like a year. For my first year of law school, I didn't really train that much. And he was training, and he got back. He got his blue belt. And then I went back to Henzo's, and he kept getting better and better and better. And he trained all the time. I mean, that was the thing. He trained all the time. And I was training intermittently. So then even when I got back to training all the time, like he was still on this upward trajectory. So, even though I was I felt like I was getting better, and then all of a sudden I hit this plateau, and he's still getting better. And I was like, man, this sucks. Not only am I not getting better, but everyone who's started training later than I did is now getting better than me. I was like, tear my hair out. And, like sometimes you're just going to get injured. People are, you're just going to hit a rut. You're just going to feel like I'm not making any progress at all. Sometimes maybe you do get worse. I don't know. You might. And, but you just don't quit. You just keep putting one foot after the other, and you keep training. I remember seeing people get promoted ahead of me, and then you just feel depressed, like I suck. And, you just gotta keep grinding. I remember going back to my firm, being as a lawyer, there's this whole other aspect of being a lawyer. I was at a big firm. The whole push is to make partners. So you have like an 8-year track. It's like an 8-year job interview. And you just basically have to work your ass off for 8 years and prove that you are partner material. And I look around there. I didn't have a big class, right, of people in my year, but there were a lot of really smart people. And I just remember thinking, like when I was a fourth year, like what are my real chances here? If this person stays, they're definitely smarter than me. This person over here, probably smart as they are, but they work super hard. They work it seems like twice as hard as me. And then you got to think about both the classes kind of above you and behind you, because when they make these partnership decisions, they're looking kind of at this 3-year window of people. And so, you just kind of try to suss it out and figure out like, where do I fit into this mix? And is this even worth me sticking around? And what I realized over time is the real value of just sticking it out, because a lot of people who I thought were geniuses, I mean, they were really smart or really hard workers, these people kind of just went by the wayside a little bit. They chased other opportunities, or, they burned out, or they screwed up, or, whatever it was. They pissed off the wrong person. The client didn't like them, whatever it was. I mean, there's a million things. Maybe they got married, they moved away. Some people were like, I'm going to go write a book. I don't want to be a lawyer. And I just realized, okay, well, maybe if I just stick around. I remember it was down to me at the end. There was only 2 of us left. And I knew I did not. She was from Yale Law School. She was a good friend of mine, super smart. She worked super hard. She worked with a lot with the chairman of the firm on big important cases. And she did great work. And I was like, there's no way that if it comes down to a decision between, my friend and myself, that I'm gonna win out on that battle. And but then she left, and I was like the last man standing. And it was not because I was the smartest, because I wasn't. And it wasn't because I was the hardest worker in terms of putting in the most hours, because I didn't. I put in a lot of hours, but I wasn't the hardest. In terms of raw hours, I didn't work on the best cases necessarily with I did actually work with the chairman of the firm on a bunch of cases too, but it was just one of those things where I was like, you just have to keep grinding, and good things will happen. And so what happened at the end of that, just to complete that story, I never became partner. The couple of different reasons, but the reason I left the firm was that, first of all, I wanted to be I discovered that I wanted to be an appellate lawyer, and the firm didn't really they did some appellate work, but you're at a firm like the one I was at, there was not just like you could just do appeals, right? So you had to do a bunch of different stuff, which was fine, but I just really wanted to focus on appeals. The other thing is my biggest mentor at the firm left to become a federal judge, and I knew that with him leaving, I didn't have the advocate, in the partner meetings. And so since he was leaving, he wasn't, he wouldn't be able to like kind of argue for me or say like, hey, he's going to work on my cases for me. He was also a guy who kind of brought in all the appeals that I'd been working on. So like the source of the work had dried up. My biggest advocate and mentor was leaving the firm. And then I had an opportunity to go somewhere else. But the good thing about that was I had left such a good impression on all the other partners. When I went into the chairman of the firm and I said, hey, listen, his name was Greg. I said, Greg, there's this opportunity that I want to pursue, and I'd be really honored, if you could give me a recommendation, because I know you've seen my work. He was so supportive, and I wound up getting the job that I really wanted, because I just kind of realized I didn't want the lifestyle of being a big New York City law firm partner, because it's just all consuming, and it wasn't the work that I wanted to do. But I wouldn't have even been in that position to kind of walk away on my own terms if I hadn't grinded as much as possible. If I had just looked around and said, you know what, that person's smarter, that person works harder or longer, this person, knows that is the goddaughter of the firm's chairman or ex-chairman. There's all these reasons that you kind of sabotage yourself or you give up beforehand, and looking back, it's the same. It's a very similar dynamic with jiu-jitsu. There's a lot of guys that I've trained with over the years who were amazing, when I was training with them. And then as time goes on, because I just kept training and training, I never stopped. Eventually, I was able to eclipse them. And there are a lot of people like that. And that happens to me too, right? Like there are people that I've trained with over the years that I was better than. And then because I stepped away, because I get older, because I got injured, they kept training. They took it to another level. Maybe they dedicated themselves to jiu-jitsu. They got better than me. That's life, right? Part of being older, I guess, is that you get a little bit more perspective, and you realize like that's not a knock on you either. That someone who started training, after you, and they get better. Well, they put in the work. Maybe you've been doing other things. And maybe sometimes people they work harder and they're more talented. And kudos to them. You can't get upset with yourself, I guess, unless you're really kind of going for that same goal. Even that, recognizing that your goals are different. Sometimes you got to go for something. You got to set a different goal for yourself, just so you can keep grinding. Just giving, instead of saying I'm going to go win the worlds, which is going to be depressing when you don't do it. Setting a different goal, which might get you to the same place, right? If you just said to yourself, I'm going to train 4 days a week, or as many days a week as I can, you're going to get as good as you can. If you train every day, on certain things, however the goals are, but if you set like more bite-sized goals, you're probably going to get better than if you just set this crazy goal that says like, oh, I'm going to go be world champion. That's an aspiration. That's not a goal. I guess it is a goal, but you guys know what I mean. So that's it. That's kind of what I've taken away from jiu-jitsu, and it's. There have been other things too. I think. I think having that kind of detached, calm mindset helps you out in a lot of different ways. In my relationships, I think definitely. it has helped, not overreacting to things, not flailing in the quicksand, not panicking, in bad situations, when bad things happen. I think is always a good thing. But I think that's kind of the most important thing or one of the most important things that I've ever learned, or I guess developed through jiu-jitsu. So that's it. I don't know if you guys have questions or have your own thoughts. I'd love to hear them. Like I said, everybody's different, and I wouldn't pretend that what is important to me is important to somebody else, or is what they derive is the most important thing that they get from jiu-jitsu. But that's for me. I decide to open your own academy, and how does that change your perspective on learning jiu-jitsu? So, when I moved out here, I quit my job. I was licensed in New York. We came out here because my wife got a job at Google, and it was a great job, great opportunity for her. And at that point, I was at the Attorney General's office, and I had practiced for about 4 years doing that work, and I had a huge case that I definitely burned out on. It was really stressful. We were really short-staffed, and it was a really high maintenance, high stress case. And we left, and I didn't have a job here, and so when I came out here, I started working for a small firm. I got licensed. I took the bar, and I started working, and I didn't get along with the guy at the firm. There was one guy who ran the firm, and we just we were like oil and water, and so I quit that job, and it was really hard to quit because I don't like to quit anything, but it was a really toxic thing, and I actually thought that if I kept working there, I was going to have to file an ethics complaint against this guy. It never came to that, but it was not good. And then there's a whole story, but I won't go into that. But so anyway, I was like, I could either open up my own practice out here in California, or I could do something else. I didn't know what that was. But the thing I realized at that moment was that, and maybe I was wrong, when I look back at it, I'm not sure that it was really the right analysis that I made. But at the time, I thought, if I open up my own practice, baseball bat guy, that's exactly right. I thought if I opened my own practice, it would be all-consuming, because being a lawyer is all-consuming. And when you try to open up your own practice, that means you're everything. You're the back office guy, you're the paralegal, you're the lawyer, you're the business person. And I didn't have to do it. So. So then I started thinking about other things. My wife was like, you have to do it. You have to do something. And so it was her idea, really. She's like, why don't you open up your own jiu-jitsu school? And so that's why, and because it's something I love to do. It's something I could learn a lot from doing, right? Because I'd never run my own business, or opened it or done anything like that. So it was a challenge. So I like that. I like having a challenge. And, it wasn't going to be all-consuming in the sense that, it kind of is all-consuming, but in the sense that I'm not going to have a client who says on Friday night, I need something by Monday or Sunday, or, a judge saying I need this by here. When you're a lawyer, when you're a litigator, you're not the master of your own time and schedule. You're kind of like, you have the client, you have the judge, opposing counsel, and so I just didn't feel like I wanted to that I could commit all that energy, or wanted to commit all that energy to practicing law. And there's no kind of half measures, right? You have to do it. You have to, when you represent somebody, you can't half-ass it. So I opened the school because that's what I love. I love jiu-jitsu. That was my next love, so to speak. And what did I learn? Let's see. Let's see. What is my perspective on learning jiu-jitsu? I think I've learned it's a very different thing. Well, when you are a student of jiu-jitsu, right? When you you need the school to be open at 8:30 a.m. tomorrow and have the heavy dummy set out. Are you being serious? Or are you just pretending to be like one of my clients? It would be more like I need you to go throw the dummy 8,000 times, by 5 a.m. tomorrow morning. It's a very different thing when you are a student and you operate on your own schedule, right? For students, that school is almost, I shouldn't say almost never, but rarely their first priority. Very rarely are there students who are like, I live for training and that's all I do. People have their jobs, they have their personal lives, they have their families, they have other hobbies. Jiu-jitsu for them is an hour, 2 hours a day, a couple days a week. They come in, they want to learn something. They're like, what's the instructor going to teach me? I don't know. We're just going to go in, we're going to find out. It's going to be new. I'm going to love it, right? There's this, it's a wonderful thing about jiu-jitsu is like the first couple of years, every day is this new, exciting, information. And then it's also, you go in every day and for the first couple months, year, you're pretty much getting your ass beat. And then you start getting better. As the instructor, you're there all the time. And, it's your job to start teaching, sharing what you know and structuring the class and taking care of your students. It's not about you anymore, per se. It's not about what am I going to learn today. It's about what I'm going to try to give to everybody else. But the funny thing about that is that you start learning a lot about jiu-jitsu because you're consumed with it. You're just all the time like, what do I teach? What is the best thing to teach? You're no longer just kind of this passive recipient of jiu-jitsu knowledge that you just kind of have to practice and get better at. Now I have to affirmatively think what I'm gonna teach and how I'm going to structure this class and how I'm going to structure this curriculum. You have to stay on top of jiu-jitsu. You have to stay on top of all the the competitions. You have to stay, you have to follow all these athletes. And then there's all the other issues of just running a regular business. So you have to do all that stuff. So I think, and then of course, that kind of goes back to you. Like, okay, well, I'm teaching people things, and I'm seeing how they're learning. I'm seeing what works, and then it also changes because you're training all the time. You're teaching, you're training. I still compete. So then it becomes like, well, what's the most efficient way? I can apply these lessons to like how I learn jiu-jitsu. Before I taught, I'm trying to think of, I used to, before I opened the school, I used to kind of fight tooth and nail in every match or like every roll. And at some point, like you can't physically do that. It's really hard. You burn out, you get injured, you get tired. And then when you roll with a lot bigger people, all the time, physically it wears on your body and it doesn't work after a certain point, constantly fighting as hard as you can. And so I learned how to be really lazy in my jiu-jitsu, which at a competitive level is not the greatest thing, but on an everyday, daily basis, when you're rolling with less experienced people that are a lot bigger, stronger, younger, more athletic, is a really effective way to train because you let them make all the mistakes. Now, at some point, people get good enough that you can't just be passive. You have to attack. So, I mean, I'm not giving you the strategy of like just be passive and good things will happen, because it's not quite true. But you learn how to conserve yourself and pick your battles. And so I guess in terms of my own training, I think I've changed in that way. And I've gone back to Henzo's, and it's funny, when I go back there and I train a lot differently than when I was training there every day, because I just have a different mentality. it's not, I used to show up and fight like hell every class, and that was fine because I had a day I could just take off the day whenever I wanted, because I'm the client, I'm the student, I can do whatever I want. I don't have to go in twice a day or three, or 4 times a week or 5 times a week. If I'm sore, I could take that day off, or whatever. I don't have to roll. I'm under no obligation as a student at an academy to roll with every single person, right? I just say, I'm just going to roll with my friends. But when you're the instructor or you're the owner or whatever, you have to roll with everybody. You have to. So I think you have to change the way that you do things that way. And I guess the other thing is just that you realize, like, just because something works for you doesn't mean that it works for everyone else, because you see how different people progress and how they learn. And you realize their goals are not always your goals. That, as an instructor, you realize, you see you have all these different people. They all have different goals. They're all more or less legit and respectable. And so, when you're training, you kind of adopt. When you're just training for yourself, you're just like, this is my goal, and this is all I really care about. But when you have to accommodate or teach people who have different goals and different expectations, you realize that there's a lot of different ways to train and teach and learn and experience jiu-jitsu that you don't have. You don't have that perspective as an individual student who's just there to learn jiu-jitsu for themselves. So I guess that would be my take on that one. So I hope that answered the question. Anything else? What do you guys think? No? All right. Well, I'm gonna take off. I'm gonna go eat dinner and get my wife ready for her dinner, or get dinner ready for her. Tomorrow, hopefully, my wife is feeling okay. We'll be back to the gym doing some push-ups and sit-ups and whatever. But if you guys have questions, anything, right? Please feel free to ask Kevin or myself. I'm happy to talk about any of this stuff. It's always fun to kind of like sit back, literally in this case, and kind of think about, what are you getting out of what we're doing here, right? Like, and whatever it is, like, you should feel like it's worthwhile, that you are in fact getting things, like accomplishing the goals or accomplishing whatever the purpose is of what we're doing. Not just for jiu-jitsu, I guess, but it is good to kind of sit back and try to think about that perspective. Make it a weekly thing. All right. Good stuff. All right, guys. So I'm going to sign off. See you guys tomorrow at 5:15. Yeah. Thanks for listening to me ramble on, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. See if I can make my fancy graphics go on. Here we go. Let me see. Woohoo! All right, guys. Have a good night.